August 14th, 1945. Japan surrenders. World War II is over. Across the Pacific, across Europe, across the United States, thousands of Boeing B-17 flying fortresses sit on airfields. The bomber that won the daylight war over Europe, the aircraft that epitomized American strategic bombing, the plane that became a symbol of Allied air power. 12,731 B-17s were built during the war, more than any other four-engine bomber except the B-24 Liberator. They flew from bases in England, North Africa, Italy, the Pacific, bombed targets from Berlin to Tokyo. Now the war is over. What happens to them? Do they get scrapped, converted, stored in the desert, sold to civilians? The answer, all of the above. And some fate stranger than you might imagine. Because what happened to the B-17 Flying Fortress after World War II is a story of surplus, reinvention, and unexpected second lives. Most would be scrapped within months. Some would fight in new wars under different flags. Others would become firebombers, cargo haulers, even corporate transports. And a few would keep flying into the 21st century, 80 years after they were built. This is the story of what happened to the B-17 Flying Fortress after World War II, how the mighty bomber fleet was dismantled, how surplus aircraft found civilian uses, how some fought in conflicts America never anticipated, and how the survivors became flying museums. Let's start with the numbers. When World War II ends in August 1945, the United States Army Air Forces has approximately 4,000 B-17s in service. That's active aircraft, in squadrons, at bases, ready to fly. Another several thousand sit in storage, at modification centers, in depots, awaiting assignment or disposal. The Boeing production line in Seattle is still running, turning out B-17Gs at a rate of 16 per day. The moment Japan surrenders, the orders stop. Production halts immediately. Boeing is told to complete aircraft already on the assembly line, then shut down. The last B-17 rolls off the production line on April 13th, 1945. Actually, that's before the surrender. Production already slowing due to the shift toward B-29s. The final B-17 built is B-17G-11OBO, serial number 44-85784. Delivered April 1945. She never sees combat. The war in Europe ended in May. The war with Japan ends in August. Total production, 12,731 B-17s, all variants. From the prototype in 1935 to the last G model in 1945. Now the military faces a massive problem: what to do with thousands of bombers they no longer need. The military budget is being slashed. Millions of servicemen are being demobilized. Wartime production is ending. The military doesn't need 4,000 B-17s. They don't need 1,000. They probably don't need 100. The B-29 Superfortress is the future, more capable, longer range, pressurized, better in every measurable way. The B-36 is in development, even larger, even more capable, intercontinental range. Jets are coming. The B-47 Stratojet is being designed. The future of bombing is jet-powered. The B-17, first flown in 1935, is obsolete, a product of pre-war thinking, outclassed by modern technology. The decision comes quickly. Keep a few hundred for training and transport duties. Scrap the rest. Between September 1945 and December 1946, thousands of B-17s are flown to storage facilities across the southwestern United States. The largest site, Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona, what will eventually be called a boneyard. Also Walnut Ridge Army Airfield in Arkansas, Ontario Army Air Base in California, Albuquerque Army Air Base in New Mexico. The famous Norden bomb site, once classified top secret, is removed from every aircraft. Some are stored, most are destroyed to prevent technology transfer. The machine guns, typically 13.50 caliber Brownings per aircraft, are removed. Thousands of guns sent to depots, some sold as surplus, many melted down. Then, the aircraft themselves are processed, Some are sold whole to civilian buyers for remarkably low prices. A few $1,000s for a 4-engine bomber that costs $238,000 to build. Most are scrapped, cut apart, the aluminum melted down. At Kingman, workers use cutting torches and saws, disassembling B-17, reducing them to scrap metal. At these facilities, B-17 arrive by the hundreds, landing, parking, engines shut down for the last time. Crews walk away. The bombers sit in neat rows, waiting. The disposal process begins immediately. First, remove valuable components, engines, instruments, radio equipment, guns, anything that can be reused or sold. Boeing R-182. Zero Cyclone engines are removed, sent to maintenance depots, stored for future use. Some will power civilian aircraft for decades. Navigation equipment, radio systems, bomb sites, all removed, cataloged, stored, or scrapped. The work is systematic, brutal, wings cut off, fuselage is sectioned, metal sorted and baled, thousands of B-17s turned into aluminum ingots, shipped to factories, melted down to make pots, pans, cars, appliances. A bomber that flew missions over Berlin becomes a refrigerator in a Kansas kitchen. The scale is staggering. At Kingman alone, over 5,000 aircraft are scrapped. B-17s, B-24s, B-25s, B-26s, C-47s. The facility processes aircraft faster than any factory built them. By 1947, the Great Disposal is largely complete. Perhaps 200 to 300 B-17s remain in military service. The rest, scrapped, sold, or abandoned. From 12,731, built to a few hundred in less than 2 years. But not all B-17s are destroyed. Some find new military purposes. The Air Force, newly independent from the Army in 1947, retains several hundred B-17s for specialized roles. The SB-17 becomes a search and rescue aircraft, equipped with a droppable lifeboat under the fuselage, used to locate and rescue downed air crews. These aircraft served through the late 1950s, flying search patterns over oceans, dropping survival equipment, guiding rescue ships to survivors. The CB-17 and VB-17 become cargo and VIP transports, modified for carrying personnel and equipment. The DB-17 becomes a drone director, controlling radio-controlled target aircraft during weapons testing. The QB-17 becomes the target itself, war-weary. B-17s converted to unmanned drones, flown by radio control, used for missile testing and gunnery practice. These drones are deliberately shot down, some by fighter aircraft practicing interception, others by surface-to-air missiles being tested. Hundreds of B-17s serve this final purpose, contributing to weapons development by being destroyed. The Navy also uses B-17s, designated PB-1, used for maritime patrol and anti-submarine warfare. The Coast Guard operates a few, for search and rescue, ice patrol, maritime reconnaissance. By the mid-1950s, even these specialized roles are ending. Jets and helicopters take over. The B-17 is retired from U.S. military service. They're purchased covertly, through front companies, smuggled to Israel via Czechoslovakia. Israeli B-17 conduct bombing raids against Egyptian positions, including a controversial raid on Cairo in July 1948. The aircraft are difficult to maintain. Parts are scarce. The operations are challenging. By 1949, Israel retires its B-17s. 2 are scrapped. 1 is displayed at the Israeli Air Force Museum. Taiwan received several B-17s from the United States in the early 1950s, uses them for reconnaissance missions over mainland China. These missions are dangerous, flying over hostile territory, facing MiG fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The last military B-17 is retired in 1959, 14 years after the war ended. But the B-17's military career isn't over. Other nations still want them. Several countries receive B-17s through military aid programs or purchase them as surplus. France receives a few dozen, uses them for maritime patrol in North Africa and the Mediterranean. Portugal operates B-17s into the 1960s, conducting maritime patrol around the Azores and African colonies. Brazil receives several, uses them for coastal patrol and transport. The most unexpected operators, Israel and Taiwan. Israel acquires 3 B-17s in 1948, during the War of Independence. Several Taiwanese B-17 are shot down. Others are damaged. By the mid-1950s, they're replaced by more modern aircraft. Bolivia operates a few B-17, uses them for transport and occasionally for internal security operations. By the 1960s, even these foreign military operators have retired their B-17C. The military career of the Flying Fortress is finally over, but the civilian career is just beginning. As the military scraps or stores thousands of B-17, civilians see opportunity, a 4-engine aircraft, durable, well-built, available for a fraction of its construction cost. What could you do with a B-17? The answer, almost anything. The first civilian use, cargo hauling. Companies purchase surplus B-17s, remove the military equipment, install cargo doors, convert the bomb bay to cargo space. These converted bombers haul freight across the United States, into South America, across the Pacific. They carry mail, machinery, food, medical supplies, whatever needs moving. The range and payload capacity make them ideal for remote operations, landing on rough airstrips in Alaska, Canada, South America. Some operators install passenger seats, turn B-17 into airliners, carrying 20 to 30 passengers in the fuselage. These operations are rough, uncomfortable, noisy, but they work. One company, Aircraft Specialties, converts dozens of B-17 for civilian use, sells them to operators worldwide. Another use, aerial mapping and surveying. B-17s are modified with cameras, survey equipment, used to photograph terrain for mapping. They fly systematic grid patterns, cameras clicking, recording topography for military maps, civilian maps, geological surveys. These operations continue into the 1960s, mapping remote regions of Alaska, Canada, South America, Africa. Then someone discovers the most famous civilian use, firefighting. In the 1950s, California faces increasing wildfire threats. Forest fires, brush fires, threatening communities. Ground crews can't always reach the fires. Roads don't exist. Terrain is too rough. Aerial firefighting becomes essential. But purpose-built water bombers don't exist yet. Someone gets an idea. Use surplus bombers. Modify them to carry water or fire retardant. Drop it on fires. The B-17 is perfect. Large payload capacity. Rugged airframe. Good low-speed handling, relatively cheap to acquire. Companies begin converting B-17 to air tankers. The bomb bay becomes a water tank, holding 2,000 gallons of water or fire retardant. Drop mechanisms are installed. The pilot can release the entire load at once, or in stages. The converted B-17s are designated with tanker numbers, Tanker 17, Tanker 40, and so on. They prove remarkably effective, flying low over fires, dropping retardant in precise patterns. The B-17's durability is crucial, flying through smoke and turbulence, operating from rough airstrips, taking punishment that would ground lesser aircraft. By the 1960s, dozens of B-17s are fighting fires across the American West. They save forests, communities, lives. Some of these air tankers operate for decades, into the 1980s and 1990s. Tanker 17, AB-17G, fights fires until 1990, 45 years after it was built. Tanker 40 flies until 2002, nearly 60 years after construction. Several B-17 air tankers are lost in crashes. The work is dangerous. Low-level flying in mountainous terrain, turbulence, smoke, mechanical failures from aging aircraft. But the survivors keep flying, saving forests, proving the B-17's durability. Other civilian uses emerge. Some B-17s become corporate transports, purchased by wealthy individuals or companies, converted to luxurious flying offices. The spacious fuselage allows comfortable seating, conference tables, sleeping quarters. A few celebrities own B-17s. Though the operating costs are high and the fuel consumption brutal, Some B-17 are used in movies and television, flying in films depicting World War II air combat. The most famous, 12 O'Clock High, 1949, using actual B-17, real footage, real aircraft. Later films like Memphis Belle, 1990, also use B-17S, a mix of airworthy aircraft and ground replicas. By the 1970s and 1980s, as the B-17 population dwindles, a new movement emerges: Warbird preservation. Aviation enthusiasts realize these historic aircraft are disappearing, being scrapped, crashed, lost to neglect. Organizations form to preserve flying examples, not as static displays, as airworthy aircraft. The Confederate Air Force, later renamed the Commemorative Air Force, becomes a leader in this effort. They acquire B-17G Sentimental Journey in 1978, restore her to wartime configuration, keep her flying. The Collings Foundation acquires B-17G 909 in 1986, restores her meticulously, tours her across America. The Experimental Aircraft Association, EAA, operates B-17G Aluminum Overcast, gives rides to the public, educates about World War II aviation. These organizations face enormous challenges. Parts are scarce, expertise is limited, costs are staggering. A complete restoration costs $1 to $2 million, maybe more for aircraft in poor condition. Operating costs are brutal. The 4 Wright R1-820 engines burn 200 gallons of fuel per hour. That's $1,000 plus per hour just for fuel at modern prices. Maintenance is constant. Inspections, parts replacement, corrosion control. Every flight requires hours of maintenance. Insurance is expensive. Regulations are strict. FAA requirements are demanding. But the organizations persevere because these aircraft represent history. They're living museums, flying memorials. Today, approximately 10 to 15 B-17 remain airworthy worldwide. That's from 12,731 built, a survival rate of about 0.1%, 0.1%. The most famous, Memphis Belle, the B-17F that completed 25 missions, made famous by a 1944 documentary. After the war, Memphis Belle toured America raising war bonds, then sat outdoors in Memphis for decades, slowly deteriorating. In 2005, she was moved to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. A 13-year restoration followed. In 2018, she was unveiled, fully restored, displayed indoors, protected from the elements. She'll never fly again. Too fragile, too valuable. But she's preserved for future generations. Other famous B-17S, Shoo 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 Baby, at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Crashed in Sweden during the war, recovered, restored. Mary Alice at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford in England, one of the few B-17S in Europe. Sally B at Duxford, the only airworthy B-17 based in Europe, appears at air shows regularly. Fuddy Duddy at the Pima, Air and Space Museum, a veteran of 83 missions. Younger people see history come alive, not in a textbook, not in a movie, in reality. The organizations offer flight experiences. For a fee, you can fly in a B-17, sit in the waist gun position, feel the vibration, smell the oil and exhaust. It's as close as modern people can get to experiencing what the crews experienced, minus the flak and fighters. These flights fund the preservation efforts. Each ride helps pay for fuel, maintenance, insurance, but there are also static displays. B-17S that will never fly but still serve as museums. The Smithsonian has several. The National Museum of the U.S. Air Force has multiple examples. Texas Raiders, formerly of the Commemorative Air Force, tragically crashed at an air show in Dallas in 2022. 6 people killed. The loss of Texas Raiders highlights the risks of keeping 80-year-old aircraft flying. But the surviving organizations continue because the educational value is immense. When a B-17 appears at an air show, crowds gather. 3 generations, veterans, their children, their grandchildren, the sound of 4 R182O engines, that distinctive rumble, It's unmistakable. The sight of the fortress in flight, the grace despite its size, the majesty of a machine designed for war. Veterans who flew in them approached with tears in their eyes, touching the metal, remembering friends who didn't return. The Castle Air Museum in California has several B-17s outdoors, weathering, slowly deteriorating despite best efforts. The mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Georgia has a B-17G displayed prominently. Museums worldwide have B-17s, from England to Australia to Israel. Each tells a story, where it served, what missions it flew, who crewed it. Some bear battle damage, deliberately preserved, showing the punishment these aircraft could absorb. Others are restored to pristine condition, looking like they just left the factory. Both approaches have value. The battle-damaged aircraft show the reality of war. The restored aircraft show the achievement of American industry. Let's talk about what made the B-17 significant. The B-17 Flying Fortress was designed in 1934. First flight, July 28, 1935. It was revolutionary for its time. 4 engines, all-metal construction, defensive armament, ranged to strike deep into enemy territory. The name Flying Fortress came from a reporter who saw the prototype bristling with guns. The name stuck. The B-17 entered service in 1937, saw limited combat before Pearl Harbor. But from 1942 to 1945, it became the backbone of American strategic bombing in Europe. Based in England, B-17s of the 8th Air Force conducted daylight precision bombing raids. While the British RAF bombed by night, Americans bombed by day. The B-17 made that possible. The statistics are staggering. Over 290,000 sorties flown, dropping over 640,000 tons of bombs. The cost was terrible. 4,754 B-17 lost in combat. Nearly 47,000 aircrewmen casualties. But the impact on Germany was devastating. Factories destroyed, oil refineries bombed, transportation networks disrupted. The strategic bombing campaign shortened the war. Historians still debate by how much, but it mattered. The B-17 also served in the Pacific, though less famously. Smaller numbers, longer distances. The B-24 was more common there. But B-17Es fought in the Philippines, Java, New Guinea, the Solomons. The aircraft that ended the war was a B-29. But the aircraft that won the daylight war over Europe was the B-17. Today, the B-17 legacy continues, in museums preserving history, teaching new generations about World War II, in air shows keeping the aircraft flying, demonstrating what these machines could do, in veterans' memories, though fewer each year, the men who flew them, who maintained them, who loaded the bombs, and in the aluminum still flying, 80 years after construction, still teaching, still serving. So, what happened to the B-17 Flying Fortress after World War II? Most were scrapped, quickly, efficiently. Thousands reduced to aluminum ingots within months of the surrender. Some served on, in specialized military roles, search and rescue, cargo, target drones, into the 1950s. Others went to foreign air forces, Israel, Taiwan, Bolivia, Portugal, France. Flying in conflicts America never anticipated. Many found civilian uses, cargo haulers, airliners, mapping platforms, and famously, firefighters. A handful were preserved, restored, kept flying by dedicated organizations and individuals, and a few crashed. Accidents, old age, the inevitable fate of aircraft flown decades beyond their design life. From 12,731 built, perhaps 50 survive in museums. Maybe 15 still fly. That's a survival rate that would horrify the crews who flew them, who assumed these aircraft would last forever. But the survivors carry the memory of all B-17 means, not just an aircraft, a symbol. And as long as even one keeps flying, that symbol endures. The Flying Fortress. Still flying. Still teaching. Still reminding us of what was sacrificed to win that war. That's what happened to the B-17 after World War II. Most died quickly, some served for decades, a few remain, and they're treasured, maintained, flown with reverence, because they're not just machines, they're monuments to the men who flew them, to the war they helped win, to a generation that saved the world. As long as a B-17 can fly, that memory lives.